She was calm when she said it, no warning in her voice. You don't know what you've started between us. And in that quiet moment, I realized she was right. It started as one of those evenings that barely register in memory, the kind you expect to forget as soon as it ends. The room was calm, softly lit, conversations overlapping in low, comfortable tones. I was there out of habit more than intention, standing near the edge of the space, observing instead of participating. That's when I noticed her. She didn't enter with noise or demand attention. She simply arrived, and the atmosphere adjusted around her. Confident without being loud, composed in a way that felt earned. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, each step grounded, as if she knew exactly where she belonged. She wore elegance the way some people wear comfort, naturally and without effort. When she spoke to me for the first time, it wasn't dramatic, just a question. But she asked it while facing me fully, her body angled in a way that said, I had her attention. Her eyes didn't wander. They held mine steadily, warm but assessing, like she was actually listening before I'd even answered. I remember the faint scent of her perfume, subtle, clean, something I couldn't immediately place, drifting between us as she leaned slightly closer. Our conversation was easy, too easy. She smiled at the right moments, laughed softly without rushing to fill the silence. When I paused to think, she didn't interrupt. She waited. That alone felt unfamiliar. Most people talk over you or rush the moment along. She didn't. She let it breathe. At one point, someone called her name from across the room. As she turned, her hand brushed against my forearm. It wasn't dramatic or intentional enough to call out, but it lingered half a second longer than necessary. Warm, grounded, the kind of touch that settles instead of startles. I felt it travel upward, quiet but undeniable, like a ripple beneath still water. I told myself it was nothing, accidental, harmless. But when she looked back at me, just briefly, just long enough to meet my eyes again, there was something there. Not flirtation, awareness, as if she had felt it too, and chosen not to explain away. The rest of the evening unfolded normally, at least on surface. But something in me stayed slightly off balance. I caught myself tracking where she was in the room, noticing when she laughed, when she grew quiet. When she passed by again, close enough that her shoulder nearly brushed mine, the air shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. Nothing happened. No promises. No lines crossed. And yet, when I left that night, I carried a strange certainty with me that something small had cracked open. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to let in a feeling I hadn't invited and wasn't sure how to close the door on. I didn't expect her to follow me home in my thoughts. That was the unsettling part. Days passed, ordinary and uneventful. Yet she kept appearing in the quiet spaces, while I waited for a reply that never came, while I stood in line somewhere familiar, while the room around me grew still. It wasn't longing yet. It was awareness, the kind that arrives without asking whether you're ready. When we saw each other again, it felt different immediately. Not louder or more obvious, just sharper. We were seated closer this time, close enough that I became conscious of where my body ended and hers began. Our knees hovered inches apart, the space between them charged with attention neither of us acknowledged out loud. She crossed her legs slowly, unhurried, and I noticed how she didn't shift away from me afterward. She spoke softly, her voice lower than I remembered, as if the conversation belonged only to us. While I talked, she listened with that same calm attention, chin resting lightly on her hand. Her eyes stayed on mine, steady and thoughtful. When I hesitated mid-sentence, unsure how to phrase something, she smiled. Not wide, not teasing, just enough to encourage me to continue. It felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with touch. Except there was touch. She reached for my wrist as she made a point, her fingers wrapping gently but firmly around it. The contact was brief, casual in appearance, but it lingered. Her thumb pressed lightly against the inside of my wrist, warm against my pulse. I could feel my heartbeat respond immediately, louder in my ears than it should have been. She didn't apologize or pull away. She finished her sentence as if nothing unusual had happened, then let her hand slip back to her lap. I became acutely aware of myself after that, of how close I was sitting, of the way my shoulders had angled toward her without me realizing it. I wondered if she noticed the shift in my breathing, the slight tension in my jaw as I tried to remain composed. I told myself to step back, to reset the balance, but something in me hesitated. I didn't want to break whatever quiet understanding was forming. There was restraint in her, too. I could sense it, in the way she held my gaze a moment longer than necessary, then looked away first, in the way she smiled without inviting anything further. It wasn't uncertainty, it was control, and that, somehow, made it harder. As the evening wound down, we stood side by side near the door, close enough that I could feel the heat from her arm through the thin layer of fabric between us. She shifted her weight, her shoulder brushing mine lightly. This time, she didn't move away. I didn't either. Nothing needed to be said. The awareness had settled between us, quiet but undeniable. Not permission, not a promise, just the understanding that something had begun, something neither of us had named, but both of us now carried with care. It happened late enough in the evening that the world felt softened around the edges. Most people had already drifted away, leaving behind a quieter version of the space. Lights dimmed, voices lowered, time stretched thin. We found ourselves alone without having planned it, standing near a window where the city lights blurred into something distant and unreal. She spoke first, but not about anything important, not at least on the surface. Her voice was calm, steady, yet there was a weight beneath it I hadn't heard before. When she talked about her life, she didn't list achievements or milestones. She spoke in reflections, choices made, moments missed, the tired kind of wisdom that comes from having lived through things instead of around them. I listened more than I spoke. It felt right that way. She leaned against the window frame, arms loosely folded, her posture relaxed but guarded. Every now and then, she glanced at me as if checking whether I was still there with her. I was. Completely. There are things, she said quietly, you don't expect to feel again. Her eyes didn't leave mine when she said it. Not challenging, not inviting, just honest. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how young I must seem beside her experience, and how steady I felt anyway. Like what? I asked. She smiled then, but it didn't reach all the way to her eyes. Like being seen, she replied. The air between us shifted. I stepped closer without realizing it, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, the softness in her expression when she let her guard down. She smelled faintly of something warm and familiar, and I had the strange urge to stay exactly where I was, as if moving away would break something fragile. She exhaled slowly and turned slightly toward me. Her shoulder brushed my chest this time, deliberate but gentle. She didn't apologize. Instead, she stayed there, the contact light but grounding. I could feel the warmth of her through the fabric of our clothes, steady and real. I shouldn't be saying this, she murmured, more to herself than to me. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to pull back, to restore the distance that made sense. Another part, the quieter, truer one, didn't want to pretend this moment wasn't happening. You don't have to, I said finally. She looked up at me then, searching. There was vulnerability in her gaze now, unguarded and raw. Slowly, she lifted her hand and rested it against my arm, just above the elbow. Her fingers curved naturally there, as if they belonged. The touch sent a quiet jolt through me. Not heat, not urgency, but something deeper. Recognition. I notice everything, she said softly. Even when I try not to. I covered her hand with mine, not tightening my grip, just acknowledging it. Our hands fit together easily, and that alone felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. She didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her fingers slightly, grounding herself, and maybe me too. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The world outside the window kept going unaware. Inside, something fragile hovered between us, balanced on a breath. We didn't kiss. We didn't promise anything. But when she finally stepped back, the space she left behind felt heavier than the closeness had been. And I knew then, the line had already been crossed. Not by touch, but by truth. We didn't plan the next moment either. It arrived the way real things do, quietly, without ceremony. We were standing closer than before, close enough that the space between us felt intentional. The room was almost empty now. The hum of distant noise softened into a low backdrop that made everything feel private, suspended. She was the one who broke the silence. You don't know what you've started between us. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile when she said it. The words weren't playful or dramatic. They were steady, almost careful, as if she'd weighed them before letting them go. Her arms were loosely crossed, not defensively, but like she was holding herself together. When she looked at me, there was no challenge in her eyes, just truth. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The weight of her words settled into my chest, slow and deliberate. I searched her face for certainty and found something more complicated. Vulnerability layered beneath confidence, hesitation beneath control. This wasn't a warning. It was an acknowledgement. I didn't mean to, I said finally. It was the only honest thing I had. She exhaled softly, her shoulders easing just a fraction. I know, she replied. That's the problem. She stepped closer then, closing the last bit of distance between us. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and placed her fingertips against my chest, just over my heart. The touch was light, barely there, but it grounded me instantly. I could feel my heartbeat under her hand, steady but unmistakable. Her palm warmed against me, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. I didn't move away. Instead, I lifted my hand and placed it gently over hers, not pressing, not claiming, just holding. Her skin was warm beneath my palm, familiar already in a way that surprised me. The contact felt intimate without being rushed, charged without being unsafe. Her gaze softened as she watched our hands together. I've learned to be careful, she said quietly. With myself, with my feelings. I nodded, understanding more than I could explain. I don't want to be something that complicates your life, I said. Her eyes lifted back to mine. You already are, she said, not unkindly. But not in the way you think. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full. We stood there, close enough to share breath, close enough to feel each other's presence without crossing further lines. I could sense the restraint in her, the discipline it took to stop where we were. It made me respect her more, even as it made the moment harder to leave. She finally drew her hand back slowly, her fingers brushing mine as she did. The absence of her touch felt louder than the contact had been. She straightened, reclaiming some of her composure, but her eyes stayed on me a moment longer. Whatever this is, she said softly, it deserves honesty. I nodded. Then we'll be honest, I replied. She gave a small, knowing smile, not relieved, not regretful, just real. And as she stepped away, I realized she was right. I didn't know what I'd started, but I knew I wasn't walking away unchanged. After that night, we did what responsible people do when something feels too fragile to handle. We stepped back. Not dramatically. No declarations. No rules spoken out loud. Just space. Polite conversations that ended sooner than they used to. Longer pauses before replies. Careful distance that looked reasonable to anyone watching. But absence has a way of sharpening what presence once softened. I noticed her everywhere she wasn't. The chair she usually took. The way a room felt quieter without her voice anchoring it. Even laughter sounded thinner, like it was missing a lower note. I told myself it was relief I felt. relief that things hadn't gone further, that lines hadn't been crossed beyond repair. But relief doesn't ache the way this did. When we finally saw each other again, it was unavoidable. A shared obligation, a familiar place. I felt her presence before I saw her. Like the air had shifted slightly, grown warmer. She looked composed, as always, but there was a restraint in her posture I hadn't noticed before. Her smile was softer, more careful. We spoke like nothing had happened. That was the strangest part. Ordinary words, exchanged politely, while everything underneath them vibrated with what we weren't saying. She stood across from me, arms relaxed at her sides, close enough that I could see the subtle tension in her jaw when she listened. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away quickly anymore. We didn't rush to hide it. As we parted, she reached out, almost absent-mindedly, and adjusted the collar of my jacket. The gesture was gentle, familiar, something someone does without thinking. Her fingers brushed my neck lightly as she smoothed the fabric, her thumb grazing my jaw for just a second longer than necessary. The touch was brief, but it landed deep, quiet, and intimate. I felt it long after her hand dropped away. "Take care," she said softly. I watched her walk away, aware of how much effort it took not to follow. Later we talked, not about us directly at first, about fear, about how life complicates things without asking permission. She admitted she was tired of explaining herself to people who didn't listen. I admitted I was afraid of being dismissed before I was understood. The honesty came easier now, tempered by restraint. "I don't want to be reckless," she said quietly. "I don't want to be a mistake," I replied. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in her expression softened. "You're not," she said. "That's what makes this hard." We stood close again, close enough that our arms brushed when one of us shifted. This time, she didn't pull away. She rested her hand lightly against my back, just for a moment, a grounding touch, steady and reassuring. I placed my hand at her side, careful, respectful, feeling the warmth of her through the fabric. She exhaled, leaning into the contact before stepping back again. The doubt remained. The distance, too. But something else had taken root alongside them. Longing, patient, and persistent. We were no longer pretending nothing had happened. We were simply deciding how much we were willing to risk. The decision didn't come with fireworks. It arrived gently, like something we had been circling for a while, waiting until we were brave enough to stop. We met without an excuse this time. No shared obligation, no coincidence to hide behind. Just a quiet understanding that we needed to talk. We sat side by side, not across from each other. That felt important. Close enough that our shoulders touched lightly. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her through the thin space between us. She folded her hands in her lap, then unfolded them again, a small sign of nervousness she didn't try to hide. "I've spent a long time being careful," she said softly. "Sometimes careful turns into lonely." I turned toward her, giving her my full attention. "I don't want to rush you," I said, "or pretend this is simpler than it is." She smiled faintly at that. "I don't want simple," she replied. "I want honest." We talked slowly, choosing our words with intention. About expectations, about respect, about the realities that surrounded us, even when we wished they didn't. She admitted she was afraid of being judged, of having her feelings dismissed as something reckless or indulgent. I admitted I was afraid of being underestimated, of not being seen as steady enough to stand beside her. She reached for my hand then, threading her fingers through mine naturally, as if the choice had already been made somewhere deeper than language. Her grip was warm and sure, grounding. I squeezed back gently, feeling the quiet relief in the simple act of being allowed to hold her. "I don't need you to prove anything," she said, her thumb brushing slowly over the back of my hand. "I just need you to be here, present." "I can do that," I replied. And for the first time, I knew it wasn't just hope, it was truth. She leaned her head against my shoulder, carefully at first, as if checking whether I'd pull away. When I didn't, she settled there fully, her weight light, but trusting. I wrapped my arm around her back, resting my hand between her shoulder blades. She exhaled deeply, the tension easing from her body as she relaxed into the embrace. We stayed like that for a while, no rush to speak. Her hair brushed against my cheek, soft and familiar, and I rested my chin lightly against the top of her head. The closeness felt calm, not urgent. Safe. She tilted her face up toward mine, close enough that I could see the softness in her eyes. Instead of a kiss, she pressed her lips gently against my temple, a quiet, deliberate choice. The gesture carried more meaning than anything hurried could have. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it settle. "This is us choosing," she said quietly. I nodded, my hand still warm against her back. "Together," I replied. There was no declaration beyond that. No need for one. We had chosen each other. Not loudly, not recklessly, but with care, clarity, and the quiet confidence of two people finally stepping forward instead of away. Time didn't rush us after that. It settled around us gently, allowing what we'd chosen to grow without pressure. There was no sudden transformation, just a quiet unfolding. We learned each other in small, ordinary moments, the kind that don't look like romance from the outside, but feel like everything when you're inside them. Mornings became slower when we were together. Coffee shared in comfortable silence, her fingers wrapped around the mug as she listened to me talk about things that mattered less than the fact she was listening. Sometimes she'd reach out and rest her hand over mine on the table, her thumb moving in a small, absent-minded circle that said more than words ever could. It was grounding, reassuring, real. We walked side by side often, close enough that our arms brushed naturally. When she slipped her hand into mine, it felt effortless, as if it had always belonged there. Her grip was relaxed but sure, and every time our fingers intertwined, I felt the quiet confirmation of being chosen, again and again, without spectacle. There were still conversations, honest ones, about pacing, about boundaries, about how the world might see us. But those talks no longer felt like obstacles. They felt like proof of care. She spoke with the confidence of someone who knew herself, and I listened with the steadiness of someone who wasn't trying to rush ahead. We met each other in the middle every time. One evening, we sat together watching the city lights come on, her legs tucked comfortably beside mine. She leaned into me, her head resting against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her without thinking. She fit there easily, like the shape of us had been quietly rehearsed. I felt her breathe out, slow and content, and I realized how far we'd come from hesitation. She tilted her head to look up at me, smiling. Not the guarded smile from before, but something softer, warmer. Her eyes held a calm certainty now. She lifted her hand and brushed her fingers lightly along my jaw, a familiar touch that carried affection instead of tension. I leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, lingering just long enough to make her smile deepen. Later, as we sat with our hands intertwined, she squeezed my fingers lightly. "I meant what I said," she murmured. That night, I nodded, understanding fully now. "I know," I replied, because I did. I understood that what she'd started wasn't confusion or complication. It was connection. Something steady and intentional. Something that didn't need to be loud to be real. As the evening settled around us, I watched her smile in the quiet glow of the room, her fingers still laced with mine, and I felt a deep, settled warmth. Not the rush of something new, but the calm of something right. And for the first time, there was no hesitation left in me at all.